This channel is part of the History Hit network.
My mother told me later, when she went into the house after seeing me off at the station, she looked up at the clock, and the clock had stopped. And she thought that was an omen, that the clock said, you're going to be killed.
We were having our meal, and one of the waitresses we'd got to know a little bit, I don't remember her name, sat down, and we told her that, yeah, we joined the Army. And she looked at my friend Jack, says, you'll come back. She looked at me, says, you won't come back. She won't come back. So I said, oh. So I'm going to get killed over there.
On this 72-hour pass, we got married, and I was an hour and 20 minutes late coming back from my pass. I said to her, I said, well, darling, I don't think I'm going to see you again, because I think this is a real thing. I said, the way everything's going. So anyway, she happened to say to me, she says, you have to come back to me, you're mine now.
I wasn't afraid to die because I knew I was going to die. It was for sure I was going to die. So that's, I had that, carry that weight on my shoulders all the time I was over there in Sicily and Italy.
Allied invasion craft sped to 7 landing points along 100 miles of coastline. Allied guns blasted at 0 hour.
This was a day for which Canadians had worked and had trained, and their training showed to good advantage. On the beaches of Pequeno, they began a new chapter in Canadian history. The official announcement that
it was the biggest thing that had ever happened up to that time, and it was, no question of that. I'm told that there were up to 3,000 ships of every sort. Now, we're talking landing craft and battleships and freighters and God knows what all. We were invading the shore of Sicily with the Americans on the left, the Canadians in the middle, and the British on the right.
We expected anything, all hell to break loose at any moment, but everything was quiet, and you know, you had a feeling that you just had to do it, and what's going to happen is going to happen.
It wasn't too bad at that time, but that night, German aircraft came over and they were strafing and bombing us, so forth. I'd been trained not to show fear, and I didn't, but I was scared. I was so scared that when I came to get up and give a command, I couldn't move. I was frozen solid. It couldn't have lasted too long because I realized that I had to get my men off this beach and over into some type of shelter. So I jumped up on my feet. Bullets were flying around all over the place. And I just said, come on, you rotten, lazy bastards. What do you think this is, Christmas? Get over here. I did it because I couldn't do without doing something myself to make myself go. Surprisingly enough, they all moved.
We were going down the trail. It was just like a donkey trail, 2 tracks, wagon track sort of thing, and he was just laying on the road.
Who?
An Italian soldier. He was killed, and it looked like he hadn't been dead very long. But what struck me mostly was that funny smell, like licorice smell, And every time I smell licorice today, I see that body laying there.
Under a burning sun and over choking, dusty roads, the advance went on. General Simmons' troops pressed on to Motica, and the Edmontons were among the first in. Here, the Italians gave token opposition, then ran up the white flag. What remained of the
Just as soon as they saw us coming, they came out of the turrets there. They didn't surrender as soon as they saw us coming towards them. The Italians were pretty good soldiers, so they surrendered fast.
That's not quite usually what makes a good soldier.
No. Well, they were smart. They weren't going to get killed.
We decided that I'd go into town to take the surrender. So I got on a motorbike, and the mayor is jogging alongside of us. This fellow in all his regalia and everything else, jogging alongside of us, holding onto these medals, you see, trying to keep up with us on this motorcycle, even though we're going as slow as we can. We got our feet in the ground most of the time, eh? And as we come into town, there are people out on the balconies and waving and viva, viva, and all this kind of stuff, and white sheets over the balconies and everything. Here's pretty close to 1,000 Italians all ready to surrender. They're in ranks just like they're supposed to be. All their weapons and everything are stacked out in front of them. And there's me and one Lance Corporal to take this group, take the surrender.
Fallschirmjäger zur Verstärkung der Abwehrfront auf Sizilien.
Germans different. Germans entirely different. Germans were Africa Corps. They had come from North Africa. They'd been fighting over there for a year or better, so they were lucky to live that long. And they were good, hard, seasoned soldiers, and they didn't give up very easily, let me tell you.
Well, I guess we just knew that it was going to be harder because you're fighting all Germans, no Italians. So, yeah, we knew it was going to be tough.
Immer wieder greifen die Briten, Kanadier und Nordamerikaner mit starken Infanterie- und Panzerkräften die deutschen Stellungen an. Unsere Truppen setzen der feindlichen Übermacht entschlossenen Widerstand entgegen.
When we ran into the Germans, and I heard a kind of a hissing sound. And this bomb landed right beside me, in between the legs of the two I see. Yeah, and the concussion was just horrific. Harold Lasky, the boyfriend, my very best friend, one of my very best friends, and he was hit. He was hit really bad. It got right between his legs, that explosion. And he was asking for a cigarette, and I wanted a cigarette, and I could see his fingers hanging down, and literally in there. And I got around somebody who found a cigarette for him, gave me a cigarette, and that was about the end of him. I thought, well, that was close. I had a close call there. But I wasn't worried because I knew I was going to get killed anyway.
The going was tougher now because Germans were in front. The Canadian task was to cut the enemy's communication lines in the heart of Sicily and drive him back towards Mount Etna. At high speed, they moved forward through increasingly rugged country, deep in the heart of Sicily.
It was a very difficult war, very difficult war. Everything was up. All the towns that were occupied by the Germans were up.
But then we were heading for Sorrow. And there was a Sorrow, the town of Sorrow is on the top of the mountain. So the brigadier says, that's your next objective. You go take that town.
The Germans never thought that anybody could ever get up there.
It was so rough there, the dried up riverbeds and undergrowth and everything, that almost impossible to get through. And the north side of it was heavily defended with the Germans. You could see all kinds of emplacements there. Our commanding officer decided that the best bet was to go around to the undefended part and attack it from behind. Sort of pull a Wolf at Quebec thing. Remember Wolf of Montcalm, when the British climbed the cliff there in Quebec, the French people didn't expect them to go up that way.
And he said, "Okay, boys, up you go."
It was so steep that you couldn't get up it. And what we did, we'd push a man up and he'd reach back with his rifle and pull you up. And that's why we kept leapfrogging all the way up the mountain that way.
They found their way up there in the dark without making any noise at all, which is tremendous, you know, when you think about it. Germans didn't think anybody could ever get up there. So that's all they had was one machine gun up at the top.
Everything had to be real quiet so the Germans wouldn't know we were there.
We found these 3 sentries there. We knew they were there, like we didn't know just where. Long was the section commander, and he managed to grab them. 2 of them were asleep. One was, they think, was awake, but he got up and started to run, so Long dropped him with his Tommy gun, and the other 2 surrendered. Before 5 o'clock, we had nearly 500 men up on top of that mountain. And we'd be able to dig some kind of a slit trench so we'd be under cover.
And then the shells started. Germans started shelling the top of the mountain. And there was an old Roman castle up there in ruins. And we found a little cave there, so we crawled in the cave and out of the shelling.
They were firing their mortars at us. They did that, they'd fire maybe for 10 or 15 minutes, they'd stop maybe an hour or 2, and then they'd fire again. They counterattacked 11 times against us. That was over the 2 days that we were on the mountain. We realized we were going to have an ammunition problem. A soldier can go a couple of days without food if he has to, but ammunition is the big question.
So we collected a whole bunch of stuff, and our men climbed up to resupply them.
Well, in the infantry, you depend on each other. Farmers are the same way. They depend on each other.
All our guys come from the farms in Ontario. Hastings County, Northumberland County, that was all farm country.
And regardless if you own a farm or you work on a farm, you go and help all your fellow farmers. If he has a problem with sickness or anything, you go and help him.
One company would carry all the materials, which was my company, and the other company would protect us. So C Company was a protecting company. We were the carrying company. Half of us had backpacks, and we would carry them, and we would offload one to the other, all the way in, way behind the enemy lines.
They carried this big radio up there. One of the officers spotted where the German artillery was. He radioed back to our artillery, and they opened up, and it wasn't too long They wiped the German artillery out.
When it becomes silent, you know that they've left.
The Canadians took a deep breath after capturing Osoro and prepared for their big swing to the east and Mount Etna. But first there was Leonpont, an important road junction in the center of the island. Canadian tanks were brought up in strength.
That was the most terrifying town that I ever went into.
I can't hardly even describe it. Limbs coming off the olive grove, you know, trees and dust and explosions all over the place. Just some of it was air burst and some of it was ground burst. Really bad.
And then we went into attack after the shelling stopped at 7 o'clock, and we were already at the edge of the town. And the Germans knew they were smart because they'd been fighting a long time. As soon as the shelling started, they knew something was going to happen.
We were going through with machine guns blazing. You just start shooting down a street where you think is a street because you couldn't see. It was pretty difficult. Well, you try not to even think that you might be shooting a civilian. Because when you shoot civilians, generally what happens, there's very few males left around other than what might be the soldiers. So it's almost like shooting your mother. No, really it is, because you don't want to shoot a mother, and I've seen them laying on the ground with babies in their arms, you know, and they're both dead.
We got heavily mortared coming down the road, and we came to an olive grove on the right-hand side of the road with an abandoned German tank. The fighting had got pretty fierce up ahead. Couldn't go any further on the road at that point in time. So I deployed my platoon into this olive grove on the right-hand side of the road. And he dropped an 88 shell around the corner of that tank. And I only got one piece of it. It came in and tore my shoulder blade all pieces, see? They came in on their belly and crawled in and grabbed a hold of me and pulled me out to a Jeep that had a rack in it for stretchers and a Red Cross flag on it. And they put me on one of the stretchers, and there was another guy in there too, as well. And we took off down the road towards the regimental aid post, you see. And in spite of this damn big Red Cross up on there, they peppered us all the way. The machine gun bullets were right just behind the truck or the Jeep most of the time. So that's how I got hit. That was the end of the war for me.
And as the Canadians reached the end of the first chapter in the liberation of Europe, the townsfolk of Ajira heard the pipes of the seaports of Canada. And it won't be long until the same mad music of the pipes is heard in many another town in a Europe freed of the Nazi tyranny.
It's quite an accomplishment. Your first battle, so to say, you've done very well. And we've done it, you know, in pretty short order.
It has to be understood that the British did our invasion of Sicily and Italy took over 23 German divisions away from the invasion front in France and also away from the Russian front in Russia. And if we had not gone into Sicily and Italy and done what we did, the invasion of France would have been a total failure.
It was the United Nations victory. The soldier, the worker, the farmer, the people of Canada had won. Here was the key to victory everywhere.
And when I come home, Dr. Orr drove my wife and my little girl to the station in London, Ontario, to meet the hospital train. I was walking by that time, but I was kind of a mess. I forget what I had on then, probably an airplane splint or something like that. But didn't matter. Didn't matter. I have a picture of the two of them. I'm hugging them both at the same time. And my little girl is looking at me with a kind of a pensive look, you know, wondering who this guy is. Anyway, I'm sorry I got a little choked up on that one.
Sicily is ours. Sicily is free. The first breach has been made in the walls of Hitler's European fortress. The first of the lamps of Europe has been relit. 2 miles away lies Italy.
It was a happy place. But you always had it in the back why you were there, you know. That was war.
I wanted to be part of the war. It was a good part of my life, I think. I was very proud of that.
Did it bother you that you were making weapons?
No. Felt kind of proud that we were putting out such a beautiful gun. The Bren gun was a beauty.
We were happy to do what we were able to do. I never thought it was so much to somebody said it. It was a very big thing that you did. I'm glad I did my part to win the war.
I believe war was a man's job. But our women rolled up their sleeves and pitched into an amazing assortment of jobs. And as they took over these duties, many of them dull, dirty, and monotonous, they released men for frontline fighting.
I figured that if we all help out, we'll be able to get them home sooner. That was my only reason. I wanted them to come back sooner than they did.
Defense Industries Limited showed up in Saskatoon recruiting single women. He couldn't tell me very much about it. I said, I really don't want to sign up for this and find out I'm going to be scrubbing toilets. And he said, you might be. He said, it's all important, whatever it is that you are assigned to, depending on your abilities.
Industry gave a sort of national wolf whistle.
3 days later, we arrived in Toronto. It was an adventure.
I said women wouldn't pay any attention, but they came from all over Canada.
Well, I was thrilled. We lived in Smith Falls, and usually you just, went to school, you got married, that's it. So to come to the big city and get a job and work, it was really exciting.
You guys don't remember the Depression.
There was no work. So people were destitute, you know, so we had a great big garden, and from the garden, we didn't know what meat was. I didn't know what a steak was. I didn't know what pork chops was. I didn't know any of that till I came to Toronto.
Streaming daily into over 50 explosive and chemicals plants across the nation, the tide of workers floods in. And as more than 50,000 men and women crowd towards the gates, men and women who once worked on farms, in garages and in stores, they become part of an industry whose soaring expansion is one of the great stories of Canada's wartime mobilization.
The first 3 days that we were there were orientation days. And we were interviewed, we were fingerprinted, we were photographed. Things were explained to us, how important it was to, that this job was very important, not to be taken lightly. And if any rules were broken, and the rule book was quite thick, if any rules were broken, we'd be gone. We changed in the locker room, and we got fresh clothes every day. No jewelry, no hairpins, nothing that would create any static electricity.
Because what would happen?
It would blow up.
That isn't a bandana.
Not really, it's the wrong
How
shape,
can you
isn't
tie
it?
that?
No, I don't know, but if you put it into
That's not a bandana.
You put them on like this. You tied it up here, making sure all your hair was covered. As you can see in the pictures, people did manage to get some hair out.
Then we used to take this here and flip it up and tuck it in. It made kind of a nice little pom-pom there on the top. Classy.
It was overwhelming because when they hired you, they didn't tell you what you were going to do or anything. They just sent you to a bench with a group of people and said,
That's
this
right.
is what you're going to do. And of course, I wasn't very good at it, I'll tell you.
This is ASA powder on its way to the caps and debts room. Caps and detonators. Go slow. Be careful. Check again.
I was working in the cordite area, and before the shells came to us, they were burnished, beautifully shined up and everything. And one gentleman, for some reason, there was some type of explosive or something, and somehow static electricity. He thought it wasn't burnished quite well enough, and so he thought he'd give it another little touch, and he lost an eye.
They would tell you about the girl who caught her hair in the drill shaft, and it pulled her scalp out. And they had that piece of hair with her scalp on it in alcohol. This was what might happen if you don't wear your bandana properly.
Those on the necks, Barney builds bombs, Brenda does Brenda guns all day long. They're not shy bells, they're bombshells, kicking Adolf where it hurts. They've got boyfriends fighting.
There was a lot of accidents there. Like I got my thumb taken right off on a machine. A lot of fun. We had a lot of fun, didn't we?
She's a real cutie, she's doing her duty. She does it looking like a million in a skirt.
Call up into the armed forces or transferred to new factories took many of the skilled workers employed here in peacetime. Those who remained trained the new workers.
His name was William. He did work for the company. He was 20 years of age. He asked me one day if I knew this song, My Prayer.
My prayer glory is to linger with you.
And after I finished singing it, he turned away like this, and he wouldn't look at me. And so I figured later on that he was in tears. And I figured also that he was trying to tell me something through this song. And we were married. He joined the Navy, and he went overseas 3 months later. His ship was torpedoed and sunk in the English Channel.
I felt sorry one night for me working in there, and I was getting tired, and I felt, oh, terrible. And then all of a sudden, my mind came to him. My brother's out there lying in the trenches, and the bullets flying over his head, and here I'm sorry for what I'm doing. I should be ashamed of myself. And so that made me feel better, and I was quite happy where I was working compared to what he was doing.
We were free. We had money. We could do things now. We weren't restricted quite so much with our parents and that.
The war helped me a lot, yeah. With making money at John Inglis, people couldn't get over that I saved my bonds, and I went to Herman's Furs and bought a fur coat. Can you imagine that at 21? Buying a fur coat?
To have a beauty pageant during making of guns and all the things to do with the war, and they stop and have a beauty pageant. Why? I don't know.
We used to go out quite a bit. We had some lovely parties. We had parties at the King Edward Hotel and Castle Loma. And then we used to dance at the Palais Royal, you know, and what they call the Sea Breeze in the summer, which was an outdoor dance hall.
Remember, we were young girls, only 18 years old. Remember that? Because we changed from the zipper thing and got all dressed up. I had long, long hair, and you did your hair up, and you went dancing at the Sea Breeze, not looking like John Inglis.
So any of the boys that you were dating, or the service boys that you were dating?
No, we didn't bother with them at all.
You mean you didn't bother with them?
We met a lot of men,
yeah.
And like every time we met a man, he was going overseas. I'd see him twice, overseas again. Then I'd meet another fella. Lots of fun. Many times they'd asked her to write to them overseas. I wrote to a lot of fellas.
Yeah.
But when I came home in Toronto, when I bought my house, I tore all the airmen and all the, I tore all their pictures.
You didn't?
I did, yeah, I tore them all up. Because I was married then.
Oh, yeah.
know? Yeah, I was married.
My husband's ship was torpedoed and sunk in the English Channel. I just fell into my mother-in-law's arms. We were told there are survivors. We waited for 3 long, lonely, and torturous months before the Germans would release the names. There was 128 boys did not make it. And the postman, when he found the card in his pack, he went directly to the neighborhood. And he gathered up all the neighbors in the neighborhood. And they're all walking behind him and came to our door. They were holding flags, waving, shouting. They knew, before my mother-in-law knew, that he was in a German prison camp. She phoned me at the Norman Slater Company, and I asked my boss if it's all right to go home. And he said yes, of course. When I went down the stairs from where I was located, I heard all this banging going on, and what it was all the boys in the shop were banging on their machines, and they were just trying to say to me, great, just great news. That's what they did. They were banging on their machines with the hammers. So I ran all the way home.
Well, I remember the day the war ended.
I do too. Oh, we yelled our head off in John Inglis.
There was kind of a deep-seated relief, you know? No more guns, no more killings. It was a relief.
Once the boys came home, we had to give up our jobs and return them to them. They told us that at the very beginning. They said, immediately the boys come home and want to get back to work, you will leave the company.
There was 14,000 to 16,000 people worked at Small Arms. And in one day, we were told that was the end of the factory. Amen. No warning, no nothing. That was it. So we're all out of work in that day. It wasn't fair at all.
Well, I didn't leave at the end of the war. I stayed on for a while making cigarette lighters. And it wasn't the same. This was just a job. And the setup men or whoever it was looking after would come along and say, well, now don't forget that the batten has to go in there real tight, because if someone goes into Simpson's and buys a cigarette lighter and it's not, and the batten isn't packed in there tight, they're not going to like it. And is that important? That isn't what I was used to, you know, packing batten in a cigarette lighter.
Every woman thrilled to fascinating devices which were to turn the post-war home into a housewife's paradise and make housekeeping a pleasant part-time avocation.
I was happily married, and my husband had a job. He was of the old school that felt if he couldn't support us, he was not doing a good job and that I didn't need to work. Maybe we could have used the money, of course, but it wasn't the money, it was I had nothing to do, which was a terrible, sad time of my life. Maybe one of the neighbors laughed and said, she's washed the walls so often the nails are showing through. I was depressed, yes.
Well, they just figured the woman's place is in the home. They weren't very happy about their women going out. They figured they should stay in the house. But it changed. The majority won. They think the women is just as good as right to go to work as the men.
Here we are.
Great.
Carry them with me. You never know when you're going to use them, and that's what I do with the spoon. And you can do roll out the barrel. We'll have a barrel of fun. Roll out the barrel. During the war, they were treated as equals with the men, and so there was a definite change. The influence of the war had a lot to do with making women independent. For the gang's all here. There we are.
My daughter-in-law was right, and I take my hat off to the ladies. To many of the problems of war, they gave a new solution. To the problems of the peace, they are doing the same.
Later on in life, about 4 years ago, I was at an event at the Ajax Library, and I was introduced to a gentleman. Come, Louise, you must meet this man. And he was a gentleman about my age, and he was visiting from England. He was in the service. He said, whenever we opened one of those cases that said Ajax on it, we knew we had good ammunition. And I thought that was important. All those years later.
Well, this one I don't know. Even though I worked on parts of it, I'd never seen a completed one before. But this is the old standby. This is the beautiful Bren. It's elegant looking, isn't it? And I'm proud of what I did for it. And what you did for me. Yes. Is that enough? Is that enough? Can I go now?